One thing that I really like about Jobs to be Done as a framework is that it's not owned by any one discipline. It's not a design language or an innovation language or a marketing language. It can literally be a common language across the organization. It has that potential. I write about this in the Jobs to be Done playbook, but it's not that easy to actually do that, right? So I think the potential is there, and the question is, how do you scale out a system or a common language, particularly around innovation across a large organization? And that's what we're going to be talking about, that and more, with our special guest today, Jay Gerhardt. My name is Jim Callback. I'm the co-founder of the Jobs to be Done Toolkit, also the author of the Jobs to be Done playbook. And I'm here with Elaine.
Me, Elaine Mathias. I'm the other co-founder of the Jobs to be Done Toolkit. Welcome everybody for our monthly community event, Jobs to be Done Untangled. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. We have the agenda today. We'll go through a couple of upcoming events, and then I'll introduce Jay, our special guest. He's got a couple of slides to present and tell us his story, and then at around the half-hour point, we'll switch over to our standard Q&A for the last 30 minutes. And so that's, for those of you who haven't been before, it's very interactive. Post your questions in the chat, and then we'll have you come up on stage, turn on your camera, and if you want to ask your question directly to Jay, you're welcome to respond to questions in the chat as well. So we definitely encourage a healthy back and forth conversation there. So just a couple of quick upcoming housekeeping things. Jim and the great folks over at Venbridge Partners are doing a webinar on March 8th in Zoom. I'll post the link in the chat in just a few moments, but that'll be a great opportunity to hear from all three of these wonderful minds talking about jobs to be done. Jim will be talking about the new Canvas 2.0 that he's developed. It's really exciting. The new Canvas is pretty exciting. I don't know, Jim, how would you say it? Like, your ideas have been evolving a little bit, and so there are some changes to the new version of the Canvas that kind of reflect some of the conversations you've been having over the past couple of years, and some new ways of thinking about the different buckets in which we categorize things in jobs to be done. So if you haven't taken a look at the new Canvas, I'll post a link to that in the chat. It'll also be in the follow-up resources, but it's out there on our jobstobeDoneToolkit.com website. Additionally, we have our next Untangled is March 28th. So always the last Tuesday of every month at 12 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back here with a next special guest for March. And then lastly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Jobs to be Done Toolkit, we also have a do it on your own time video learning course called the Jobs to be Done Essentials course. So that's where Jim gives a really great overview of using jobs to be done, how to be a facilitator with jobs to be done within your own company. So if you want to really launch this type of initiative, that's a big part of the video learning as well. And we also have a lot of resources and tools as part of the package so that you can, to kind of help you with different so you have different canvases and frameworks to take into your meetings and work through the ideas. All right, so now I am happy to introduce our special guest, Jay. Is it there? Here we go. Jay Gerhardt from Atrium Health. Jay is the Director of Innovation. He's joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, Jay. We're really excited to hear about your experiences, kind of learning about jobs to be done and identifying why it's a really good framework for driving customer centricity within your organization. Welcome. Give us a little bit of your story.
Great. Thanks a lot. And I appreciate being able to join y'all. I just really appreciate what you and Jim do to build the community and bring different people together. And I just love looking. I wish it had the countries under everyone's name, because I love the international feature of all of this. But yeah, a little bit about myself. If you I want to give a little context, because I think a lot of people who are into jobs to be done know how important context is. I've been with Atrium Health. We're a large not-for-profit healthcare system based in Charlotte. I've been with Atrium actually 25 years now. The vast majority of that time was actually spent in strategic planning. So I was doing strategy. So for 18 years, I was helping open facilities, service lines, looking at market share reports and whatnot. And around the 2016 timeframe or so, I started doing some work on what we were calling our consumer strategy, which for a healthcare organization in 2016, uh, forming a consumer strategy is like basically starting to use the word consumer, something that is pretty familiar to everybody, but healthcare, it takes a little while to even use the word. So I didn't have any exposure to innovation, and I started working on a project that got me bumping into a couple of my good friends. I think one of them is, I think Will is on this call actually. Will Behrman and Ann Summers Hogg started working together. So I wasn't in innovation at that point. Ann Summers and Will were. And they started talking to us about this more consumer focused project we were on. And where we ended up going is to work on this project, which was in kind of the area of urgent care, virtual care, on demand care. They were wanting to learn jobs to be done because they just done a course at Harvard Business School with Clay Christensen and wanted to get deep into the practice. And I was wanting to, with some others, uh, bring some of these kind of product development innovation tools to our work. So the long story short is we hired Bob Mesta and the Rewire Group to do this work with us. And we wanted to apply it to this project, but we also wanted to learn jobs. We wanted to learn how to do the interviews, learn how to deploy it. And for me, the reason it was transformational is all the work I'd done in the past, I'd never interviewed a customer. I use spreadsheets, I use lots of market share reports, but I never had to interview anyone. So for me, just doing that and working with Bob, as many of you know, he's kind of a master interviewer. Um, that helped me get my foot in the door to innovation. And I eventually ended up shifting over to the group. We needed a change of pace. It was very different work. So working with Bob, learning jobs, starting to read everything about it. It was kind of how jobs was my way of beginning to learn innovation. So that's a little bit of my story. I might get into it a little bit, but I don't want to talk too long.
Oh no, I think that's a great story. I'm very curious how, just one quick follow-up question, that how did your experience with corporate strategy sort of set you up for doing innovation work?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Like what were some
Um,
of the overlaps, or where are some of the ways that you feel like maybe the corporate strategy space is lacking or not maybe keeping up with some of the more customer-centric thinking that we see today?
I think there is a lot of overlap between innovation and strategy, or at least there probably should be a little bit more. I particularly like The Invincible Company by Alex Osterwalder. And I think anyone who kind of sits in the world of strategy and innovation, that's a great resource. But I think it's understanding the big picture. Um, I think it helped me. We use the business model canvas a lot in our work. We use Alex's tools a lot. So I think understanding strategy and planning, I kind of wish I had learned that like 10 years ago. It would have, I think some of these innovation tools would have helped me be better at strategy. So um, that's kind of a vague answer, but I think kind of understanding the big picture, understanding planning, analysis, it kind of gives me some tools on the business model development side that some others, if you have a different background, you might not have as much as in innovation. I had to learn all the other stuff like, design thinking tools, customer discovery. That was the stuff that was really new to me.
That's great. Do you want to dive in a little bit into how you've been working with jobs to be done at Atrium Health?
Yeah, yeah. And what I'll tell everybody is, if you're here last month we had an incredible presentation by Evan Shore. He hit us with a fire hose of stuff. And I think it was fantastic. I'm actually using ChatGPT on a lot of stuff these days, but I'm almost running in the other direction. This is going to be minimalist. I'm going to show you 2 slides about how we're currently thinking about jobs to be done, starting to teach it and deploy it across the organization. And then we'll just have some dialogue about it. I'm just interested to hear what people have to say and what you're wrestling with. Before I put it up, I'll just give you a little context on the organization and our group. Atrium Health, we were previously about a 70,000 employee organization, pretty big across the Southeast, but we've recently combined. We're now part of Advocate Health, which is out of the Midwest. So we're talking about 140,000 teammate organization, so very large. We've got a group of about 9 people. We focus on business model innovation. Primarily, we're starting to work on efficiency innovation as well. We have something I may reference is called Design for Impact. Over the last couple of years or so, we've been really firming up and articulating our innovation process, and that's called Design for Impact. And I'm not going to get all into the details of it, but some of what it's grounded in, it's very grounded in jobs to be done, and it's grounded in business model canvas, value proposition canvas, some lean startup principles, and design thinking sprinkled in. So we just kind of borrowed from all of those. And it's a not-for-profit healthcare system. It's big. It's a challenging environment to innovate in. Pandemic has made it tough. I mean, it's been very challenging for healthcare leaders, but we've hung in there, been doing some good work. Okay, so let me share my screen here, and let's see. Okay, so the first slide I'm going to talk through here is, and this is really a pretty new slide. I've only recently shared it with our team. We, as I explained, we kind of started out learning jobs to be done from Bob, and he continues to be a good friend to us. So we kind of started with Switch. And about a year and a half or so ago, as we were putting together what we call our innovation playbook to say this is how we do innovation, I realized that we were also doing kind of a lighter version of jobs to be done for a lot of projects. So we articulated that as standard. And then more recently, we're starting to incorporate other flavors. So in Jim's terminology, these are kind of like 4 of our plays, and I'll talk through each one. The second slide is I want to get into the detail of the first play. I want to show you how we're thinking about it and get y'all's reaction to it. But this is what I'm just calling standard jobs to be done. It's kind of the most broadly applied technique. We are now beginning to teach, as we talk about how we're scaling, we just have recently started in recently months teaching our innovation process to leaders in the organization. So we're partnering with HR, and we have cohorts of leaders. We have about 15 or 20 in the first cohort. They bring a project or a product. These are people from all over the organization. Some of them are just in HR because we're prototyping, but academic medical centers, they could be practice managers in our medical group, anyone potentially in operations in our healthcare system that have probably not been exposed much to innovation. So we have to make this really accessible to them. So we teach this in Impact Academy, and I will get deeper into that. It particularly drives the right side of a value proposition canvas. A lot of you probably know that. So that's the standard. We have also, if I go down to the lower right, if you're familiar, I know we probably have a lot of ODI folks on the phone, but you probably have some familiarity of Switch. Switch, we actually only use all the way, we don't use it all the time. We usually do that when we're trying to really understand what's causing people to do something. And if we particularly want the output of that discovery to get to 3 to 5 clusters. So we call these, Bob calls it the job to be done. We call it the job story. I think that's actually what you use in your book, Jim. So it's like you know, when I this, help me that so I can. So you do all the switch interviews, and it actually is a lot of rigorous analysis of pushes and pulls. You do clustering. So what we learned, we actually tried to teach this in the organization, and it's just too much. When you're in healthcare, you know, your day job is challenging. So you wouldn't do this very often. It's hard to get real good at it. And then doing all the analysis behind it, that's a heavy lift for someone outside of our group to do. So switch is almost like the break glass in case we need it. And then we do that. So switch and standard jobs are kind of two ends of the spectrum. More recently, and Will, who's on the phone here with me, kind of inspired this, is we realized we also kind of do switch light. Will has done some work with our medical group, some business development type of work, and has actually taught some of our we had some physician leaders who needed to go out and talk to physicians in the community about affiliating in the organization. So the forces of progress turn out to be just a perfect framework for this type of thing. And what we wanted to teach and these are pretty senior leaders, and when they talk to folks, they're usually used to being a little bit more in sales mode, or here's what we're all about. So teaching them a little bit of switch light and the forces got them to be more empathetic and curious. And then this framework was really kind of perfect for this kind of work. So doing switch light is something that we feel like we could more or less teach some folks how to do this. And the work product is just a forces diagram, not some super deep, analytics of all the clustering and all this. So it kind of sits in between standard jobs and switch. So I call it intermediate. So I've got kind of basic, intermediate, and advanced. Basic is what we would be willing to teach many people in the organization. Advanced this is pretty much going to be limited to the IE team or innovation engine team or other innovation groups. Now, more recently, I've been reading. I'm such a jobs to be done geek and nerd. I mean, it might be some others on this call. That's why you're here. But I've been reading Tony's stuff, and more recently Scott Burleson, Jim's stuff. Now, Jim, I got to tell you, your book isn't on the shelf here because I have it digitally. If you were looking for it, I'm sorry. It's just I got it digitally.
All right, I'll take that. I'll take it. No, you're fair. No, Jay, thanks.
So I have definitely been exposing our group and thinking about ODI a lot more. And last year, I kind of dipped my toe into the water, and I didn't even do it intentionally. We're doing some work on dialysis, and I wanted to I really wanted to understand the struggles, what it was like for people getting dialysis either in a center or at home. So I interviewed about 10 people or so from across the country. Jim, I used your interview guide because I realized I'm not doing switch. I'm not trying to understand what caused them to go on dialysis. They were on it. I wanted to understand what their process and experience was. So I used your guide. I didn't set out to do a job map. I just kind of set out to learn. And after I got all the interviews together, I did value proposition canvas. And I sat down, and it might have been about the time I was getting to know Scott Burleson. And I was reading his book, Statue in the Stone. And I said, I wonder if I could do a job map. Well, I went through everything because I'd followed Jim's guide. I was able to do what I think is a decent job map, although I probably need Jim or Scott to review it for me. I need to take Jim's course, actually, and I do plan on taking Jim's course. So I actually got a job map. Then, lo and behold, I realized I was also able to identify 37 desired outcomes, which is starting to get in the realm of the number of outcomes an ODI person might deem as acceptable. So I kind of got that, but unintentionally. Still haven't used ODI a lot. We actually had a project request come up that initially seemed like something our Lean Six Sigma group would do. It felt process improvement oriented, but the champion of the project just wanted a different look at it. He wanted to use our group, and it was something in our revenue cycle. And I looked at it, I was like, you know what? This is going to be a real ODI project. Ended up not starting the project because as we got into trying to identify the problem, we realized it was a totally different problem. But it's kind of on the shelf, so I think we're going to go there. And so I'm putting it in the toolkit. And again, we maybe won't even go all the way with it. Will we do a survey? I don't know. But as you've said, Jim, start with a job map, create some good conversations. So we're early in that, but I kind of see that in the toolkit. So that's how the toolkit's emerging. Before the next thing I want to do is double click on the top left corner, but let me stop, get reactions and questions before I go into that.
So I have a quick question just to kind of get things started. Before we launched the webinar today, you were mentioning that you hadn't done a lot of interviewing before your experience with Jobs to Be Done. Is that correct?
I hadn't done one.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your personal experience, like kind of jumping into interviewing? Were you nervous about anything? How do you feel about it after having done a couple of rounds?
I guess I was very privileged that because not everyone who starts in innovation gets to sit next to Bob Mesta while he interviews and then spend 3 days with him at Grosse Point and go through it. So if you ever get, even if you don't know, if you ever get to go to a switch workshop or something and just have exposure to that, it was very unique training. So it made it so much easier. Because I basically just looked at it as how would Bob do the interview? And I would basically play him. Plus I'd listen to like 8 million of his podcasts. So that's but not everyone has gotten to do that. But I would say if you ever have the opportunity to dig in and learn from him on the, even if ODI is kind of your primary thing, it's just, he's a very unique guy, has unique method and has a way of getting people talking.
And when you were working with Bob, what was his rigor like for the process? Was he very sort of stringent, like this is how I do it the same way every time? Or was it more flexible, like kind of adjusting to what he was hearing from both the stakeholders and your team and the interview participants?
I mean, Will, feel free to jump in here. I mean, Bob is very flexible because he can apply this to about any kind of thing, but his process is it is rigorous. It's rigorous in a different way from ODI, but it's very rigorous in terms of excruciatingly documenting pushes and pulls, clustering them, boiling them down, and then putting them through a cluster analysis, and then just really working over the jobs and the Switch is very rigorous on language, and actually ODI is too. When you think about when you're trying to develop the right outcome statement and that sort of thing. So it is, he's got flexibility in terms of you can apply it to about anything, but yeah, it's a set process and the way, and again, if you hire him to do something, you're going to get switch. He's not doing probably a switch light and a standard, but I'm in a different context. I'm not a consultant. I'm in the organization.
Yeah, that's one of the things that Jim and I talk a lot with just Jobs to Be Done in general that we like is just how focused it forces everyone to be. Like, I like the way that you frame that element of the rigor in the process as like maintaining focus for everyone involved, just keeping it like hyper oriented around, you know, the push and the pull factors. Tim, do you want to come up and ask a question? And Jay, go ahead and respond if you had a follow up to that.
Sure. Hey, Jay, how's it going?
Hey, Tim, good to see you.
Good to see you. Quite two questions, actually. So generally, when you look at this, excuse me, jobs to be done or innovation, you want to get buy-in way up in the org. How far up does it go in your org?
It kind of depends. And I'll tell you, so, you know, we've had leadership change over the last 5 years where we kind of started, actually, Will and Ann Summers, years ago, we were taking cohorts of usually VPs and above and putting them through HBX, the Harvard Business School online. So it's basically teaching Clay's theories, you know, disruptive innovation and jobs. And so we brought a number of executives, some who are still with us, some who are not. So it's like when you lose people, then you've got a gap. And if you haven't brought the new people into it. So it's not everywhere in our C-suite, but we still have some leaders who have been through the course. Our top physician executive has been through the course. And out of that course, jobs usually stuck to everybody. That was like the thing that really, you know, it wasn't so much independence and modularity that, you know, everyone latched onto. It was jobs. So we have kind of senior leaders sprinkled in. We brought people through it. And to us, we're just kind of looking to make progress. Sometimes there's like small wins. A few weeks ago, we had a physician. I was in a meeting with our medical group talking about some improvement opportunities, and the discussion was getting a little supply side focused. It was a little bit too inward focused. And one of our SVP physician leaders said, "Hey, let's step back and talk about the job to be done here." And I just, you know, to me, that's a great day if I can have a simple win like that in our organization.
That's like when your kid, you know, grows up and goes to college. It's like, oh, great, awesome.
Yep.
The other part of my question too, Jay, I know you're probably going to get into it, but I was just wondering how wide you go in the org as well, as far as educating or involvement.
It's, you know, it's gotten wider over time. We're just in terms of working with project teams, but we're hoping with Impact Academy, it will start really ramping up. Now, you know, cohorts of 15 to 20, you know, that's not putting a ton of a dent in an organization of 140,000, but that's where we're starting. We get leaders, and we're kind of focusing on like AVPs and above most of the time, get them excited about it. We are working on kind of online learning. So it's all, you know, actually Jim has kind of inspired some stuff, you know, with his video. We're doing some internal training videos. So asynchronous stuff people can learn in a lighter manner. So ultimately, we want to get it very wide. We do have some interest with our friends in the Midwest, Advocate Health. So how long that'll take, it's hard to tell just because it is a big organization with a lot of needs. But, you know, at what point would, you know, many people of the organization actually understand the term jobs to be done? That may take years. But if we could get kind of leadership level, you know, talking about this, so we have it in pockets. It's just not all the way there yet. It takes a while.
Well, thanks, Jay. Appreciate it. And I appreciate your involvement as well with the podcast. I mean, I've learned so much. I'm a geek too, but you've introduced me to Jim and to Scott and all the books. And so I'm right there with you.
Good.
Thanks, Tim. We have another question in queue, Jay, from Dom. I don't know if you want to take that or continue with your second slide, and then we can pick up. Dom's question is about cluster analysis.
Yeah, let's go there.
All right, Dom, do you want to come up on stage?
Sure. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could say a little more about what you do when you do cluster analysis. Is it, qualitative, thematic. You're saying you'd put a
Yeah.
lot of work into that when you get to that point to try to form 3 to 5 job stories. I'm thinking you're trying to find themes, combinations of jobs, right? Is that the idea?
Yep. Yeah. Very quickly, basically, if you know Bob's framework, the pushes, pulls, habits, and anxieties, to form the cluster in a switch engagement, you really focus. You get all the pushes and pulls from all the interviews, and you kind of boil those down. You cluster them. I'm trying to remember that you kind of get to where you have 10 or so thematic pulls, 10 or so pushes. And then if you have a statistician or someone in your group, there's some kind of analysis like next nearest neighbor or something. You can do, Bob calls it just doing the math. And at first I did it by just sending it to Bob and he did the math for me. And then the last time I did it, I actually used some prototype software, but you can do it statistically, or you can put it all up and kind of do it more manually, which would be tougher. But you basically group people into clusters of pushes and pulls, and then you look at the other aspects of the job, and you're able to
Actually
kind of
use
write
some
the
prototype
statement.
software, but you can do it statistically, or you can put it all up and kind of do it more manually, which
Where's
would be,
that coming from?
but you basically group.
It, is that like going on Twitter right now or something?
Yeah. Sorry about that, everyone.
That was a super
You
quick
fine.
explanation. Was that Dom that asked that?
Yeah. So what are you doing the statistical analysis on? Did you do like after you create the jobs? Are you doing a survey to get a quantitative set of data, like do importance and SAT,
You
and or anything like that? Or
you don't have to. We just we've done our 10 or 15 interviews. We get all the pushes and pulls, and we could form the jobs. If we were to do a quantitative survey, which sometimes happens after switch, you're doing things either more to validate. We did a body of work where we did some quantitative work to see if we could accurately identify jobs in an urgent care setting. So you almost kind of do it as more validation or testing or prototyping afterwards. At least
cool.
that's how we've done it. Can't speak to how everyone does it.
Thanks.
Dom, how does that compare with your experiences?
Well, it's a little different than what we're doing at ServiceNow. We're an enterprise software company, so a lot of our jobs are very much about those roles in the enterprise who we're trying to solve for, and we produce some long lists. So maybe 80 statements or something. Do quantitative. We similar to like ODI, we're doing asking how important is this to your role? How satisfied are you with it? Looking for those gaps. But then we'll use that quantitative data. So, so after the qual, we are doing surveys. We're doing pretty large surveys, and then doing the quantitative analysis to both do, principal components analysis for those do stats, looking for how do you group jobs together and how do you cluster people. And then those clusters, those segments of people, that have commonalities in jobs produce our personas.
Okay.
So, it's a little different emphasis. It's, yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, Jay, back to you.
Okay, I'll hit this other slide, be a little bit quicker. So this is something very recent. So I know at some point last year, Jim and Elaine had David Duncan on, Secret Lives of Customers. Love that book. And what I like about it is we're thinking about, so this is a little bit more, how do we teach others jobs? And what I've learned is it's switch is just too much. That teaching them the forces, the timeline and clustering, that's too much. So David's book to me is more within reach. So this grid is borrowing a lot from David Duncan. The three of the only box I really changed is the bottom right box, pains and gains, is what David calls help wanted signs. we use the value proposition canvas a lot. So we want the right side of the value proposition canvas for the people we're teaching to be the prime. If they go out and do interviews or observations, we want them to be able to talk about jobs, pains, and gains. You know, keep it pretty simple. Um, uh, so we kind of changed it for that. So um, then I had to wrestle. So then I wrestled with this for a really long time. I'm throwing this out to the group. No idea what y'all think about it. There's different definitions of jobs and jobs to be done out there, depending on what school you're practicing out of. So Bob's definition is job to be done is the progress someone seeks in a struggling circumstance. I'm describing that as that's when you fully understand it, when you understand the context, pains, gains, what they're hiring today. That's kind of like you have an overall understanding. I'm saying that's when you understand all of this, you understand that. An element of understanding that, what I suggest, is a job. So I know there are a fair number of people who will practice switch where you mostly say there are functional, social, and emotional dimensions of jobs. That's not the job themselves. I'm kind of the school of thought, you know, that's a little closer to Jim and ODI, where a job is a problem someone's trying to solve or a goal someone's trying to achieve, independent of a solution. You can articulate a functional job, social job, and emotional job. So we're kind of teaching that as a definition. But when you understand all these things collectively, that is the job to be done. So this is still pretty fresh. We've only got one cohort of Impact Academy. No one so far has raised their hand and said, Jay, that's totally confusing where you use jobs in two different words. People have grasped it so far, but we're only one cohort in. So again, this is where I'm kind of taking the toolkit and the definition and blending them because I think they're both useful. And so I submit that to the group, and you can say, Jay, that's horribly confusing, or Jay, that resonates, whatever, or something in between.
And so you're using the is this a worksheet that we see in front of us that you're using as part of the Impact Academy?
Yeah, I should have explained that. So what we're teaching in impacting the section I do, I teach them about jobs. I mostly want to teach them how do you go out and do a basic jobs interview? How do you go out and talk to one of your patients or one of your internal customers in a different way that you're used to? And here's a worksheet you can complete to document your learnings. And then, if you have this, you can very easily fill out a value prop, the right side of a value prop canvas. So yeah, that's how this is what we use a little bit more from a teaching perspective to put it within reach of somebody.
And so the goal here, like from the perspective of the Impact Academy, is to enable all of the participants to feel comfortable doing their own interviews and finding their own interview subjects.
Yeah, because they're not used to that. Our healthcare folks, a lot of times they're used to going out and rounding on units, for example. They're very used to going out and asking people, how are we doing? And, all that sort of thing. And jobs is flipping it to be asking the person, how are you doing? And really deeply understand the customer. That's different from a lot of folks because we're just such an expertise driven business that we kind of get wrapped up in what we do.
I was recently reading an article by Lance Betancourt that Scott shared on LinkedIn. And one of the things that they really set up in this, it's more of like a journal article, but one of the things that they really set up is how you have to have the customer involved in order to create value. And like that sort of like mutual value creation process is really fundamental to innovation and jobs to be done.
Yep, you got it.
And have you gotten any pushback from this yet? Are they going out there and talking to people? Like, how are you monitoring?
We are I'm gonna find out soon. I'm a little nervous. We actually we have a coaching session today with some folks, and then next week they come back and give us their report. and we're asking them, how many people would you go out? I worry about their time.
Mhm.
It's these folks are busy, they're in healthcare, they've got day jobs. Did they really go out and do the interviews, or did they get in a conference room and start to hypothesize stuff? So
Right.
we're going to find out. I'm a little nervous about it, but if we don't get it right, we will work on it. We will
Yeah.
do better the next time around.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're pretty focused in terms of what you want to deliver and the kinds of behavior change that you're looking at. So you're exactly right. If it's not working this time, it's just an opportunity. I would almost expect it not to work the first time, because you have to keep
Yeah.
refining it and
Yeah.
adjusting. We have a couple of questions. Yes,
Great.
Sherry, I can share a link. I'll include that in the resources that I send out after the webinar. I have two questions in queue from earlier. One is from Francesco. Francesco, do you want to come up and ask the question, or I can read it for you? And then
Yeah, sure.
we'll
Oh,
go.
sorry.
That's okay. So we'll do your question, and then we'll do Anna's question.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the opportunity. So it's a kind of a practitioner's question, but I think that Jay, given that you're working for a big company with complex challenges, so my company develops a B2B software as a service solution for cybersecurity professionals, and our tool is used by customer ranging from small to medium-sized enterprises to large multinational corporations. And the users of such software are usually small teams responsible for the whole network infrastructure of a company. And so we map their jobs to be done according to different user personas. But what makes it really complicated is that their jobs to be done also depend a lot on the sophistication of their team, on their IT teams, sophistication of their infrastructure, of the customer organization. And so my question is, how do I effectively reduce complexity without missing out on relevant details?
Wow. That's that's it. It's
Obviously, I
like,
was expecting a perfect answer from you.
yeah, well, it's kind of like the fun, I go straight to thinking about Steve Jobs' quote about complexity. It's like one of the hardest thing is to get your thinking clean. It's something like that, is taking all the complexity and simplify. So when you tell me kind of where are you coming at this more from a switch perspective or an ODI perspective, or do you have a hybrid type of thing? Just so I know where you're coming from.
I think we're coming more from an ODI perspective. One of the big challenges is that it's just hard to even speak to, potential users, because in an organization you might have only a few people who are actually potential users of such an app. So it's hard enough to even recruit people to speak to. It's just, we've spoken to a lot of people over the past year, and their jobs in, let's say on the micro level of using a certain feature might be similar. But if you scale it up to a more macro perspective, they become so different because their organizations are completely different.
Yeah.
And even the overarching goal might be to secure the infrastructure and avert hacking or cyber attacks. I've been struggling, my team and I believe I've been struggling to really kind of reduce the complexity or scale the complexity depending on what question we're actually looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm probably not going to have a great answer to your question, but where I have heard people in these talk about using both ODI and Switch, and it makes me wonder uh, if you did kind of a Switch type of set of interviews to basically, because you usually can then cluster people into like 3 to 5 basic reasons why they buy, and it's not incredibly complex, but it's the thing about what Switch does is it's not usually one reason. It's about clusters of reasons. So we just did switch engagement for why people hire and fire primary care, and at the end of the day, we came up with 4 groups of people that had just several different of the similar things going on. It's not about 20 different things going on, but it's about more than one. So it's about how to kind of get to, whenever you can get to 3 to 5 of something,
Yeah.
whatever it is,
So
then
I'm wondering whether perhaps the complexity might be easier to reduce once you've actually spoken to a lot more people, because then the clusters become more evident. Well, whereas right now it seems like everybody has their own challenge, you know?
where I push back on that is I do think you can find clusters of people between 10 and 20 interviews. You might need to validate it with more, but and even usually just 10 to 15, and they start to fall in.
All right.
I also
Thanks.
think you're talking, Jay, you reference clusters a lot. Jim and I talk about buckets, but one of the nice things about jobs to be done is that you have these really simple buckets that can hold lots of different types of information at lots of different points in the hierarchy, moving up into the why and the aspirational outcomes versus like more of the functional outcomes.
Mhm.
And so, a lot of times, like maybe it makes sense to create a related job and use that as a bucket for holding information that you're just kind of like, that's too much complexity. We want to put it over here, but we don't want to forget about it right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. I want to shift to Anna because she has a question. And Dom, do you have a follow-up comment, Dom, to what we were just talking
Yeah, I
about?
was just going to say that's great. And what we do is that level or altitude of the job is really important. I think that's what you're getting at. And at a very high level, you've got these, motherhood and apple pie goals. We want to delight customers, we want to grow our business, where everybody does that. At the very low level, you've got actual tasks, like steps in a process that are more geared to the current solutions and the technology. They're anchored in there about how to go about it. If you come up one level from that, I think seems to be some of the right altitude about what are people trying to do, what are those activities, a complete end-to-end activity that defines the right level of a job that might help you get to what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think
Thanks, Dom.
altitude is exactly the right word. Thanks, Dom. All right, Anna, are you still on the line? And then if there are any other questions, post them in the chat, and then we'll bring you up in queue after this.
Do you want me to stop sharing to see so we can see everybody?
Yeah.
I forgot. I think I was first on LinkedIn, so I don't know. I didn't post any questions here. I don't know. Maybe you were referring to another Anna.
I'm referring to another Anna, but it's lovely to see you, Anna. That's fine. This is the question from Anna Valencia. I'll go ahead and ask it on her behalf, but Anna, if you want to unmute and come up on stage, you're welcome to at any point. So Anna asks, how did you immerse your team in this concept of jobs to be done? What approach do you suggest for a company that is starting with this specific concept? And how do you assess how mature the teams are?
Yeah, our innovation team kind of immersed me in it. And for us, our team is relatively small, although we probably started with about 3 or 4 of us really learning Switch. And then we started teaching people more. But are you talking about kind of within your team or kind of across the organization? Maybe elaborate on the question a little bit more.
I think that the first question is just within your own team, and then she kind of scales it into across the organization.
Yeah, it really just takes applying it to projects. We also do, we do, one of the things I'd encourage, particularly if you're on maybe a product or an innovation team, is to set aside time to practice. Projects are great, but if you're playing a sport, if you're playing football or baseball or whatever, you spend a tremendous amount of time practicing. So we will just have sessions where, we'll take, because we're also using like the business model canvas. So we'll just take a lunch or something and then just work on a business model canvas for some, other company or so. In jobs, I think jobs are something that you can apply to almost, so you can just take like something in your personal life and, if you use Switch, you could very easily start doing a forces of progress. If you do ODI, you could, get everyone in a room and say, let's develop a job map for, X thing that just popped in our life personally. But I think it's being willing to kind of break out of the project grind and let's just practice something.
Yeah. I love how playful that sounds.
We're a playful group.
Yeah. Like, let's just do it in a totally safe environment where you don't have the anxieties of like,
Yep.
how are people going to receive this? Is there already like a tense relationship with somebody?
Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. That was like one of my next questions for you actually was like, what are some of like the things, or, do you have any like tips or learnings similar to that one where it sort of helped you gain a foothold or maintain momentum?
One of the things we're working on is asynchronous learning.
Mhm.
The Impact Academy takes some real time, but also developing videos, and we kind of work on the length of the video. It's like not a 15-minute video, but what's like I have some modules are like a little, I have for example, I did a 5-minute video called Articulating Jobs to Be Done. And I teach Jim's hierarchy. I teach the ODI wording of how do you word a functional job. And then I say, this is a job story. And I just do it in like 5 minutes. Or I've also got a set of 2 to 3 minute videos, 7 of them that essentially teach the standard kind of the jobs to be done light version within about 15 minutes. So it's kind of a light version of Impact Academy. So, and just, get a PowerPoint, make it look creative and get on Zoom. And I even kind of borrowed how Jim kind of has his face so you can kind of see him on the screen so it's more engaging. So we're starting to prototype that a lot.
And with this async learning, I'm curious, like, do you think that there is, like, what is the value behind having you do the videos or somebody on your team doing the videos, as opposed to bringing in somebody externally or having somebody like Jim do them?
Because we don't have to pay the people
Yeah.
on the outside and we don't have any budget for
Yeah.
it. I also think we like doing it. Most of the folks on our team, at least half of them, Will's on here. I call Will the professor. We like teaching and we like generating content. So some of it is like, I don't want to let Jim do it because I like doing it, even though he's really good at it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's something to that. I think a lot about, there's an old military medical saying where it's like you observe one, you participate in one, and then you have to teach
Yeah.
one to become an expert, right?
We also, Design for Impact is our innovation process, DFI, which Jobs is a part of. And we really trying to brand that internally. And, so we have, to teach business model canvas and value prop canvas, there's, videos that Alex or Steve Blank have, things like that. And we use those. I think ultimately we like our team to be the voice because we're the teachers of innovation in our group. So we're trying to tie ourselves to that.
I love it. Are there, sorry, I could dominate the whole conversation with questions. Are there any other questions out there? I think we have about 10 minutes left. So if anybody wants to just come up on stage. Wolfram, do you want to follow up on your comment? We'd always love to hear from you.
Yeah, so by the way, thanks for the conversation. It very much relates to what I'm challenging with. Yeah, so I wrote it in the chat. So we had the same challenge to roll it out to convince others that this makes sense. And I just did it like telling it to my team, then it went bigger and I told it to more teams. And then in the meantime, we have since 3 years now, everyone in R&D gets an onboarding when they join the company. So they at least hear it once.
Yeah.
and then we practice it, and now others approach me, invite me to their meetings, and so it takes some time, but when you get invited to other departments or sessions, then you realize, okay, it makes sense. So, and then, I mean, patience is also important. You cannot just change everything overnight.
We've learned patience, and I love that, Wolfram. You made me think of, we had a recent meeting where we started a project with a team, one of our service lines, and we presented design for impact and how we propose to use on this innovation project. And the service line leaders, they were like, this just makes so much sense. And my boss, Todd, and I mentioned, yeah, we're starting to teach this in Impact Academy. And the next meeting, they were like, okay, I've got a list of names. How do I get into Impact Academy? They were like, we want people to learn how to solve problems this way. So they came to me and they're like, when's it starting? And so, yeah, it's like you start to do, and we work both as teachers and consultants. So sometimes we might do the project, but then we get them interested and maybe we serve as a coach. Sometimes we go deep on projects and are consultants. Other times we're coaches, but we're also just trying to build capability in the organization for people to do that. We're 9 people in a group of, really large organizations. So we want to teach everyone how to innovate in some way.
I love that mindset.
Yeah, everyone I tell you what, I'm very fortunate to have a friend. Having him in my life and learn, it was one of the most transformational things in my career. Just honestly, learning the forces of progress. If I learn nothing else, it's like that's one of the most useful, simple, and elegant things I could learn.
That's great. Do you have any specific resources on the forces of progress that you'd like to recommend to wrap up, other than just read all of Bob's books and listen to his
podcast? Yeah.
I'll include a link to the podcast.
The old one, he has a new one called The Circuit Breaker, which is really good for demand side. If you don't know switch at all or whatever, demand side sales is simple to read, and it's, short of telling you how to do the cluster analysis, doing most everything is kind of in there, timeline and all that, and it's an easy read. So that's a place to start for that.
Cool. All right, any last thoughts, any final questions? We have a couple of minutes left. We'll wrap up.
Can I say something, because it's such an interesting discussion? I'm with a big company that produces machinery, equipment. And we do have a small customer centricity team that now merges with the market research team. And we introduced Jobs to be Done like 3 years ago. I basically started with that when COVID hit us. So the first project was a purely remote project. The second one was basically one where I coached a product manager sitting in the US, and he went out and talked with a customer. And I figured that sometimes it's the very small projects where it's one person I coach that goes out and comes back and really has an insight that I could use as a best practice to share it again and spread within the company the word of that it makes sense. So it's really that coaching that you mentioned, Jay, that actually helps a lot of people. And we started also doing like 1-hour introductions on Jobs to be Done for product managers and for engineers, so that they heard about it. And some of them would come up, and sometimes half a year later, and say, hey, I heard that, tell me more about that. So after sometimes it's like you seed it and the plant grows, and some grow. Take some time.
That's that we try to plant a lot of seeds, and sometimes we plant the seed and we figure that it never sprouted, but then I'll be in a meeting with them, like, I taught one group jobs, a couple of years ago, and I never heard from them again. But then I was in a meeting with them like a year later, and they're like, oh yeah, this is how we think about things now. I was like, Well, that's the thing. When you're in a big organization and you're not with people all this, sometimes you just don't know what is taking root. So yeah, plant a lot of seeds and
That's a
something will grow.
That's a great place to end, planting the seeds. I love all the emphasis this month on facilitation and coaching and learning. That's obviously a great way to start planting the seeds. So thank you everybody for joining today. We are at the hour. We'll be back on March 28th. So please join us the last Tuesday of March for our next community event. And if you are looking for any Jobs to Be Done resources, please check out the jobstobeDoneToolkit.com where we have lots of things. For
And a
everyone.
Sherpa's Guide to Innovation podcast. I saw that in the chat, but yeah, we're on hiatus, but we have over 100 episodes, a bunch of them on jobs. We've had Scott and Tim and Bob and all the folks on there.
Yeah, check out Sherpa's Guide to Innovation. I'll include a link in the follow-up email to the event as well. All right.
Thanks,
Jay,
everybody.
thank you
Great
so
question.
much. This was great. Love hearing about your experiences. Very engaging from the audience. So I appreciate your time and bringing your energy to this group a lot. Thank you.
See you next month.
All right, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Jay.